building. And what economic historians in general have found is that human progress would not have ratcheted up as fast as it has done without the role that institutions play. One of the now most famous studies of why nations don't make progress is a book titled Why Nations Fail by Robinson and Mogulu, two professors from Harvard and MIT. But it is interesting that exactly 10 years before their book was written, I wrote a book of a very similar title, which is Why Nations Are Poor. And the fundamental thesis I offered when I wrote Why Nations Are Poor in 2006 was the same thesis that they offered in Why Nations Fail, which is really the role of institutions in performance. And I was lured into a strong interest in institutions and economic performance when in the 90s, I read a remarkable book written in the year 1990 by a man who went on to win a Nobel Prize in economics, Douglas North. And the book was titled Institutions, Institutional Change and Economic Performance. As it turned out, I was invited to give a talk at the Hoover Institution at Stanford early in 1996. And I ran into Douglas North, who was on sabbatical at the Hoover Institution at the time. And his influence was so strong that my 1998 book, Managing Uncertainty, was actually based on institutions and how that affects competitive strategy. So, I mean, who are those who ensure that the institutions work? Well, institutions basically described are boundaries outside of which there are consequences. Those boundaries then make people conduct themselves in a way that increases certainty in expectation of engagement. So that when you are outside of those boundaries and the consequence visits you, you know to stay within those boundaries. And so when you stay within those boundaries, you reduce uncertainty for people going into transactions. So the ease of transacting increases. Now, people will, for example, one of the reasons Nigeria does not thrive economically as it should is that somebody dealing with Nigeria from far away is not sure of the outcome. This letter he has received, is it from a 419 person? Now, the proposition is alluring. He would want to take economic benefit of that proposition. Now, if he transacts and is turns out to be, because it is not certain what the transaction is or will be, he basically chooses not to transact at all. If it is too tempting that he is going to try and transact, just in case he misses all this opportunity that is looking at him in the face, he then looks for ways to hedge his bet. And how he hedges his bet involves costs. Maybe he takes out an insurance policy. Maybe he goes for a derivatives instrument that will ensure that whether the exchange rate changes or not, he will still get his return for payments made in Naira and all of that. So this nature of the transaction will determine many things. If he hedges his bet, it means that his costs will be high. So transaction costs will make him uncompetitive relative to somebody who does not have that high transaction cost. I'll give you a very simple illustration from my own experience in industry in Nigeria. Back in the 1980s, the Central Bank of Nigeria had failed to make good on its commitments to open letters of credit that were opened in the boom 70s, early 80, 81, Iranian Revolution, money was flowing, oil prices went through the roof, money was flowing like anything. And so we were operating like drunken sailors in the international marketplace. By 1982, for 2 weeks, the kind of experience we're about to have now, we're having right now, Nigeria did not sell one single barrel of crude oil. Nigeria's debt began to mount. Central bank could not pay due collections on open letters of credit. After a while, foreign banks began to essentially cut off lines of credit to Nigeria. So they would rather not transact with Nigeria because Nigeria had not met its obligations. There were many results, as we all know. We began to queue for sugar, milk, what's called essential commodities. But anyway, going away from all of those to come back to the importance of law in all of this, these high transaction costs that made us uncompetitive led to a situation where, when I was in industry, for example, if Volkswagen, let me give an example, which I worked for, Volkswagen of Nigeria wanted to import CKD sets from its parent company. Because they had experienced delays in payments and all of that from central bank, they reached a point where they said, sorry, before we can produce CKD sets for Nigeria, a letter of credit that is confirmed has to be on the desk of the officer who does the planning of production. Now, in those days, to then get a confirmed letter of credit, you not only gathered money, all the money, got it into a bank, got the central bank approvals, everything, then you got the confirmed LC. This process would have taken you like 3 months from when you started gathering money. Then the thing gets there. Then the man in charge of production will compute it, okay, in next month's production, we'll produce so many CKD sets for Nigeria. By the time they then produce it, pack it, ship it, the cycle for Nigeria would be like 1 year from when we begin to gather the money to go to central bank to get FX to when the components arrive and the production takes place and sale can then take place. But if you were transacting from Ghana, Ghana still enjoyed regular international commercial credit. So 30 days credit. They would have even received the products and sold them before they have to make payment, literally speaking. But with Nigeria, the cycle was 1 year. So it was impossible, if Ghana was in any business with Nigeria, for Nigerian companies to be more competitive or as competitive as the Ghanaian company, just because their cycle was 1 year. The Ghanaians was literally zilch, 3 months, which was credit and all of that. So high transaction costs are a very critical part of people not performing within boundaries and therefore creating uncertainties. So what is the enforcer of these boundaries? The law. And that shows how important the role of lawyers in economic development, in human engagement are. Now, of course, there are many criticisms of the way law has evolved and the way law operates, and I offer some of them myself. I mean, one of my favorite reads is one offered by a French thinker of the 19th century, Frederick Bastiat. Bastiat, who died about 1850, written a number of essays, one of which appears in the book, The Law. And when he talks about human nature as the pursuit of gain without pain, and that essentially law emerges to enforce certain kinds of boundaries, but that law usually is an instrument of the powerful, so that in the main, law is legal plunder, the ability to plunder within insisted boundaries. In spite of those kinds of criticism, the truth, the naked truth, is that institutions drive human progress, as we have said earlier in the work of Douglas North and the others that have come using that tradition. Most, in fact, writings in economics today focus on the role of institutions. The Peruvian economist Hernando de Soto and his book really hone in on this, the mystery of capital. De Soto essentially argues that the difference between rich and poor countries is that in poor countries, people have a lot of assets, but their assets are frozen capital because there are no systems of representation, which is what lawyers, really are about, like a land registry in which the value of every land in the country is documented. And if your great-grandfather left you some piece of land in Iguilini or in Awomama, you could actually know the value of that land in the land registry, and you could take his fungible property as security to obtain a facility to start a business. Most people who start businesses in Europe and North America essentially leverage those assets, get a second mortgage on their mortgage, and use it to then build and grow. De Soto argues that that does not quite happen here. And who are those who can really facilitate that happening? It's lawyers. And so I consider the role of lawyers in economic development very, very important. To just round off this general discussion of how important lawyers are for institutions, institution building, and economic growth, let me cite a piece of research that heaps praise on even particular lawyers for why America is one of the most entrepreneurial economies in the world today. Two professors at the University of Chicago years ago wrote a book titled Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists. Those two professors are Raghuram Rajan and Luigi Zingales. Raghuram Rajan, who, as the name clearly denotes, is Indian, would later leave the University of Chicago to be chief economist at the IMF, and would leave the IMF to be governor of the Reserve Bank of India, that is the Central Bank of India. Now, Rajan was, in fact, governor of the Reserve Bank of India until Modi became prime minister. He disagreed with Modi and more or less quit. In my view, Raghuram Rajan is one of the smartest working economists in the world today. In the book, Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists, they give reasons, again, around institutions for why capitalism thrives in America. They make the point that some of the most dangerous people to capitalism are today's successful capitalists, because it's in their interest to prevent others from rising. And capitalism grows based on the concept of creative destruction. Small, young guys, new guys on the block with greater ideas than today's dominant player can't break in, because the dominant player is the one who has lunch with the governor, who has breakfast with the president, and they influence the way the laws run, such that they hold down the guys who could topple them, who have great ideas but have no money. So they can't have access to capital, and all of those can't develop their ideas. And they make the point that in the US, young people with great ideas with no capital have the greatest chance of having access to capital, essentially because of a set of institutions like a search fund, a vulture fund, all kinds of funds. And they actually give credit for this environment in the United States to the works of a one-time U.S. Supreme Court Justice, Charles Brandeis, and a set of judgments from his judicial activism that made America an exciting place for access to capital for people with great ideas. So, having made this point about how important lawyers are for growth and development, let me turn to the reality of our now, which is the COVID-19 pandemic challenge. Pandemics have shaped human history. They've been turning points in 14,000, 16,000 years of human history where man has made the most progress, going from Homo erectus coming forward. How have pandemics entered to our world, and why have they shaped the direction of things? Well, these pandemics generally have come from man-animal contact. And so viruses which jump from the animal kingdom into man tends to do a lot of damage to man over a period, and therefore transforms the way that he does things. Many people don't seem to realize that when man made the transition from the hunter-gatherer to the herder-farmer, man began to domesticate wild animals for food production. In the process, man's contact with animals then began this series of pandemics that man has experienced. Now, these pandemics have been of such severity that many populations have been wiped out completely in human history. And if you want to read up on this stuff, there is a great gentleman who's written some extraordinary books, Pulitzer Prize winning books, called Jared Diamond. Jared Diamond has written a book titled Collapse: How Societies Have Survived and Thrived or Failed Through Human History. That's a good read. But even if you want to even be better empowered to read that, you want to read his earlier book, Guns, Germs, and Steel. In that book, for example, you realize that the general historic misnomer or misunderstanding of how Europe conquered the Americas comes out clearly. I mean, the general myth that is put out there is that Europe, with its firepower and all of that, conquered Americas, and then Europeans moved in there, as a whole load of hogwash. The truth of the matter, I mean, if you think of it just simplistically and realistically, the Aztec civilization, the Inca civilization, produced millions of people who built things like the pyramids in Egypt and all of that, just as places of worship, could not have been overcome by 600 and something people who were on that boat with Cortez or Christopher Columbus, or, you know, it was not impossible mentally, no matter, even if they had nuclear weapons, they couldn't have succeeded in doing that. What really did happen was that food production actually began in what is called the Fertile Crescent, an area that runs from Egypt through Mesopotamia to the edges of Europe. The pandemics that came with those led to a decimation of great populations. But invariably, this led to humans developing immunity to those particular diseases. The bubonic plague, which was only about 300 and something years ago, took out 1/4 of the entire population of Europe. And as we all know, the Spanish influenza of only 100 years ago took 50 million people out of the population of the world. Now, when the Europeans who had suffered through that arrived in the New World, the Americas, and interacted with the natives. The natives became infected with smallpox, measles, and these diseases that Europeans had developed an immunity to. Jared Diamond states that 99% of the population of the Americas were wiped out by those diseases. This is what gave Europe the foothold to move into those places. Not that their guns overpowered the Indians, as you watch in those films that you see. Now, having made this point, you will see that each pandemic has resulted in some kind of economic revolutions. Things never quite returned to the way they used to be. The last pandemic, when it ended in 1919, and part of the reason I want to urge all of you to please be more careful. Yesterday, we began to open up. If you go and read up that pandemic, you will see that more people died during the second wave, months after. We haven't even hit the crest of our first wave. All this crowding around banks I saw yesterday, some burials I saw in the north and all of those will lead to millions of our people dying. I'm speaking to you from my house. I am not going to leave my home except for 1 minute, 30 minutes event around here or something, in conditions, not for fear of death so much, but for just even saving those around me. But the truth of the matter is that we are going to, unfortunately, because of the kind of choices that are being made, some for economic reasons, survival, and all of that, we're going to see a significant spike in the next couple of weeks. We're going to lose hundreds of thousands of people in this country. God forbid, but that is the truth of what all the knowledge that I have tried to build up in this matter tells me. And what is happening in Kano is a small, insight into what will happen. I just pray that all of us are more careful and make more effort to educate people around us better so we can survive this. After the pandemic, one of the great examples of what happened in the US during the flu influenza, a city like San Francisco is given as one of the best examples. It opened up and then boom, it came back. It was so severe that for 4 years after the pandemic ended, people were afraid to go to public events in San Francisco. So many lessons for us to learn there. How would this probably affect the practice of law? I think that we are already beginning to adapt to a few things working from home. Technology is going to play a very critical part in all of this. How do we embrace new technologies that can enable us to deliver the same value and perhaps even more from our remote locations? I know that research is very important for lawyers and the practice of law, and going to law libraries were very big deals, very important things to do, particularly because a very, very dear older friend of mine and neighbor, so to speak, it's just down the same street from his earlier days before he moved to Bagada. Chief Gani Fawemi did a lot for law research and all of that, and I know how much law practitioners went for his library or getting from his publications for their own libraries and stuff like that. Well, increasingly, most of those things are going to be completely electronic. Increasingly, we're going to need to spend far less time in courtrooms that are crowded with one judge going from one page to another, and somebody cites this. And I think that we're going to see technology make it so easy. You just touch one button and all the references related to that case from all perspectives will just be boom in front of you, and stuff like that. Obviously, the relationship between clients and attorneys is a very important part of the practice of law. How will we structure this relationship going forward? As we all know, even before the pandemic hit, there were already developments in the US where IT people and law students and lawyers, were creating these new companies that use technology to actually make 80% of the law that we practice technically obsolete, because artificial intelligence can give you all of those things without the touch of a lawyer. So how do we get more creative as lawyers to give value in a system where many of the things that we actually do can be provided through artificial intelligence, through machines or computers, doing it much more efficiently than we can do? I think that these are going to be challenges that lawyers are going to have to look to and help to unearth. How we organize our offices. This lockdown already shows us that perhaps we don't need to be in the office the number of hours we spend there, and that we could have smaller offices and we could work from our practices from home and remote locations. I just give a small example that we've already witnessed. Broad Street was Broad Street 40 years ago, largely because, and it was the center of Lagos, largely because of airlines. I mean, they look nice. You were going through Broad Street around that CMS intersect. You had on the right side, if you're facing coming from down, it was now I don't know whether Fort is using that building. It used to be the BP, and then later AP building. Across from them, underneath that building of the BP building was, I guess, the Grand Nigeria Airways office. Across from them, Varig, British Caledonia, and all of, technology simply just made that unnecessary. And a few years later, airlines not only did not need to have all that investment in real estate in downtowns, they actually even stopped having offices, even in airports. I mean, British Airways does not have an office in Nigeria today. They used to have one around my house here on Queen's Drive, but that doesn't even operate. They actually run, the Africa division is run from South Africa, just because of technology. I think law is going to see more and more of that happen. And I think that the earlier we begin to think of the ways that we can make that work for us rather than fear it, the better for us. I also recognize that part of the challenge of the law is really the fact that it is steeped in tradition, very deep in tradition. How can you keep tradition and yet be more modern? Maybe the symbols in the robe and all of that, maybe the issues that get discussed, but really tradition has its strength because the dignity of the profession is rooted in tradition. But modernity has its power in that it enables greater effectiveness. How do lawyers manage dealing with this apparent confrontation between tradition and modernity and new technology and greater effectiveness? This is really so important. These cases that take 30 years to prosecute, which is one of the reasons people don't invest in Nigeria. Because somebody will tell you that to invest in Nigeria, they don't know the outcome of a dispute, because the person who is wrong will be the first to go to court. And while the thing is going through the court system, they would have died, or they would have become fed up, or the thing would have lost its value. So I think that attention to a more speedy way, I know that alternative dispute resolution and all of those have been rising, and all of that. But I think the whole practice of the law needs to be more sensitive to time and its consequence for outcomes. Otherwise, it means that people are not going to be comfortable with the boundaries, and this will impact the growth and the development of the whole environment. So I think I should just stop there. Maybe we'll get more out of Q&A than my carrying on. So Charles.
Thank you very much, Prof. You know, anytime you're listening to Prof, you really have to be very attentive, because the moment you take your eye to the right or to the left, when you come back, you can't continue, because it comes at a very, very deep and advanced level. Thank you very much, Prof. I see a lot of people getting questions ready, and I appreciate the way you took it systematically, from history, and I think that's one of the things I said earlier on. And the book you talked about, Guns, Gems, and Steel, and how they evaluated 13,000 years of human existence, and you took it all the way from that place to COVID-19 and now, and then you made all these very scary predictions that I don't want to repeat. Like, I'll just say, like a regular Nigerian, God forbid, people will not die. Not touch
we'll reject it.
Reject it. Yeah. I'll just let that go through that route, and I'll not say what you said. But honestly, that has been my fear, and that is one of the reasons why, you know, we've had to battle. I've had a meeting with all of my team members in the office today, and we're about to insist that we can't afford to resume physically now, and our office has to be just for appointments only. People have to learn to work remotely, and because, like I said, COVID-19 is going to be here for a while. So it's not just 1 week or 2 weeks. And I also fear that there must still be a larger and more deeper lockdown that will become very necessary. Or like you said as well, Prof, that people will get so scared and nostalgic about going out or doing anything. So, but I don't want to worry myself so much about all this saddening news and depressing news. I just want us to have this conversation with people that are trying to ensure that they are safe, but then they don't want to be hungry. They are safe, but they want to be productive. Lawyers want to continue to be relevant. And you said something very, very, very interesting where you said, how do we keep the tradition and then remain modern? And I think that has to do with evolution, remaining new, innovation. The law needs to grow. And it's sad that as lawyers, we know that the system is growing very, very slowly, and and life is growing very fast. The future we're talking about that will come in many years to come apparently is here now. It has been fast forwarded, and then we are already here. And there's something else you said again that I've always had it in my mind, but I don't understand it. And that's where I'll bring my first question, because it will relate to your understanding of business, economy, and all of that. You said something. You said pandemic leads to economic revolution. In my small knowledge of economics and business, of economics and business, I seem to agree that when things are down like this, a few people cash in, a few people milk the system, a few people move from 0 to 1,000, and then those on 1,000. So more like there's a wealth transfer, there's a shift. Now, that's where I will take my first question before I start taking questions that are coming in. That, Prof, how exactly is it possible for a person, generally speaking, for lawyers specifically speaking, to leverage on a pandemic as we find now in COVID-19 for an economic, call it revolution, call it transportation, call it transformation, call it transpositioning? But it means that lawyers that have not been doing very well, people that have not been too much or not so successful, how can they leverage on this pandemic, literally speaking, to become more economically.
Okay. All right, Charles. Thank you. That enables me actually bring one or two things that I had meant to say that I did. The things I meant to say hit at the time when we should have formally inaugurated the African Continental Free Trade Area after. This is an extraordinarily huge opportunity for Nigerian lawyers. When the conversation around AFTA was going on, I was actually quite shocked at the failure of people to realize that the service sector in Nigeria was going to be the greater beneficiary, not the manufacturers who were locked in an import substitution strategy that had put them at a disadvantage. But if you think of how advanced Nigerian law practice is, and I got a chance to say this, I think the business law people invited me to speak at something in Abuja about a year or so ago on AFTA. Nigerian lawyers can extend their practice across the continent because we are far more advanced in law practice than many of our neighbors. And this is a good time to begin to think, how do we develop and deploy strategies, make contact with one young lawyer in Accra, in Dakar, and build a continent-wide practice. This is an opportunity for us to do that. Having said that, to return to your question proper, even though it's related to what I've just said, one of the things that times like pandemics do is make people desperate and force innovation. It is the innovation that comes from the desperation that difficult times bring that leads to the new revolution that follows a pandemic. It's a favorite story of mine that I like to tell, so I will repeat it again here about not a pandemic as such, but it's an interesting relationship to a pandemic. When the pandemic of 1918-19 ended, by the time people had the courage to begin to go out, all the innovations that came led to opportunity explosion in North America, for example. Mm-hmm. The 20s in North America and the US have been referred to as the roaring 20s in every form. The economy went up, skyscrapers were getting built. Even in music, ragtime, it was a time of great development in music and entertainment. Broadway just went through and the overexcitement eventually led us up to 29 and the crash of the stock markets. Now, as the stock markets were crashing and people were jumping from 50-story buildings to their death, a gentleman said to himself, look, things are bad, but bad times have their opportunity, and I need to harvest an opportunity in this bad time. And he said to himself, okay, what do people do in hard times? In economics, the way it's put is they move to inferior goods. So a man who used to eat filet mignon, who used to have caviar, would suddenly be looking for, what can I now eat? He would be lowering his taste. In fact, when I went to, I spent a bit of time during the Asian financial crisis, 1997, 98, traveling around Southeast Asia. And in Bangkok, there was a market that was called a market for people who used to be millionaires. That's where they came to sell their boots, to sell their Rolls Royce, and stuff like that. So people obviously move when difficult times come upon them to inferior goods. So this gentleman said, so what inferior kind of food would Americans be turning to? In those days, it was a really infra-dig thing to eat potatoes. Potatoes were for the wretched of the earth. And they grew literally in the wild in places like Idaho. So this guy's idea was, look, these rich guys may now be eating potatoes. So how do I arrange to have so much potatoes that when they want to eat, they will have to eat my potato? So first of all, he had to find out, how do you preserve potatoes? So he went to some university, some research institutes, and found that to preserve potato was a simple process. You just dehydrate it. And if you put it back in water 6 months from now, it regains all the properties of potato. So he went and collected sacks of potatoes, filled up warehouses with potatoes, chopped them into bits, slices. And whenever he wanted them, he just brought them, put them back in water and fried them. And to make those things have more sex appeal, they were not called potatoes anymore. They were now called French fries. That gentleman got together with a man who founded McDonald's called Ray Kroc, and they struck a deal that made French fries and the hamburger the American staple. That man's name is R.J. Simplot, and R.J. Simplot died worth $3.68 billion. So, this is really what it is. How can you put on the R.J. Simplot thinking cap today? Over to you, Charles.
I'm lost. I was trying to grab the thinking cap, but it's quite heavy. I don't know. I wanted to get the spelling of RJ. You said R and J.
R as in R and J as in J. Simplot. His last name is Simplot. R.J. Simplot. So you can Google him right away.
Yes. Okay. So I was dropping it in the chat room so that people can check things that people can research much later. That's massive. Roaring 20s. R.J. Simplot. Okay. There's this very senior member of the bar that has his hand. Mr. Woma, are you there? I wanted him to ask his question, and immediately after that, I'll take Mr. Ajiboye and I'll come back. Mr. Woma.
Yes.
Yes, please. Can we have your question now? Prof is waiting.
Unfortunately, I just came in. I have been trying all along to get along with what is going on.
Okay, I saw your
I
hand.
just listened to the amiable professor.
Okay.
Yes.
I'll come back to you.
Don't mind me. I was just trying the knob.
Well, that's the beauty.
Don't worry. Go ahead with all that.
All right, so I'll just lower the hand and then I'll take Mr. Ajiboye.
Just go ahead with the other person.
Yes, Mr. Ajiboye.
Okay. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, loud and clear.
I can hear you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Even though I already sent my question to the chat room, but let me just run through it, sir. The question is, can we have Prof discuss briefly the effect of this pandemic on foreign direct investments, and particularly the valuation of our currency against the dollar, considering the downturn of the main plank of our revenue base, that is oil? Thank you, sir.
Did you get it, Prof?
I got it, but that's a 6-hour response. How do I? But anyway, let me see how I can reduce 6 hours to 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Ajiboye. You see, the big problem I have with our environment is the tendency for us not to tell ourselves the truth about our reality, and therefore to pussyfoot around and continue repeating the same mistakes. I have just given 2 or 3 interviews in the last week. One was to the Tribune, another was to This Day, another was to Guardian. I don't even know whether any of them have been published, but I'm sure between now and Sunday, 1 or 2 of them will appear. And I make some of these same points. The Nigerian economy is facing a triple shock. You know, one shock is incredible. To have 3 shocks at the same time is frightening. where are the three shocks coming from? The first shock comes from an increased loss of confidence in Nigeria as an economy in the international. This was already on before COVID-19. You may recall that Forbes magazine wrote, I don't know what I call it, an article or an editorial or something late last year in which it referred to Nigeria as a money-losing machine. You know, part of the thing I've been talking about for a long time, you know, this thing about you come to Nigeria and, you know, a case will take 30 years. The biggest risk of doing business in Nigeria is regulatory risk. In 1998, the book Managing Uncertainty, which I referred to earlier, which I wrote, clearly had a model, was the central model of the book for competitive strategy, which suggested that if you take the traditional model of competition in structural economics, generally the most famous one was Michael Porter's 5 forces model. That general frame of strategy is called the structure, conduct, performance paradigm. That is to say that structure of an industry affects the conduct of players in the industry and results in outcomes, performance outcomes. And so if you looked at these 5 forces that Michael Porter had in his model, you know, intensity of rivalry, threat of substitute products, you know, barriers to entry, and, you know, buyer power, supplier power. If you take those 5 and plot it on an industry, you can tell the outcome in most normal economies. But in Nigeria, that is not typically the case because, you see, you can be looking at those factors and somebody would have met the minister in the night and the next day the policy changes completely. Or somebody can be looking at your bank and has designs on stealing it, and the next day he's appointed governor of central bank and he makes a policy that allows him to steal your bank or his friends to steal your bank. These are routines in Nigeria. So in that book, 1998, I said the predatory acts of public officials was an overarching factor in competitive strategy in Nigeria. What has since happened since 1998 when I wrote that is that those conditions have gotten worse and gotten worse. So that by last year, Forbes, as influential as it is, came to a conclusion that investing in Nigeria was a money-losing effort. And they wrote an editorial about this. Now, any normal country would do everything it can to begin to show that, no, we don't do those kinds of things. We to begin to work the environment away. But not Nigeria, unfortunately for us, because we think we can get some oil receipts, we recycle it among a small elite, and we think the country is doing well. We buy private jets. And yet the report has come in that we have become the poverty capital of the world. Even with 1/7 of India's population, there are now more miserably poor people in Nigeria than in India, and all of that. So that was the first shock, loss of confidence in Nigeria by the world. It is a shock factor in our economy. The second shock, of course, was crude oil price collapse, which you mentioned. That process started before COVID-19. If you remember, literally by the time the 2020 budget was being passed, already below the benchmark that they used to project that budget. So, and crude oil price shocks are perennial in Nigeria. Whenever we have it, we begin to look for how to, we begin to make speeches like cut our coat according to our cloth rather than according to our size and all of that. Right now, they are digging up the Oronsai report, something that could have been implemented since 2014, sorry. They are digging it up now, and they're not going to do it well. They're going to just, you know, do some, while they're praying for oil prices to return, do some band-aid, and then we'll go back to where we were once it's over. Very sad. But this is an opportunity for us to do complete reform, like India did. India was applying band-aid to all these funny things under Rajiv Gandhi. Rajiv got killed. And when Manmohan Singh came with Rao as prime minister, India had less than 3 weeks trading money in its foreign reserves in 1991. The result of their unraveling of the unpacking of the license Raj took India to where it is today. Well, we are struggling to find palliatives and asking companies to donate. It was no problem for Modi to put out $37 billion for alleviation, when this pandemic started. Anyway, the third shock, of course, is the shock from supply chain challenges caused by lockdowns around the world. Let me tell you one frightening thing that I discovered during this. And I won't mention who, but a very close friend of mine who is in the team that is doing this said to me, do you know, to my chagrin, that I discovered that there isn't 1 pint of vaccine being produced in Nigeria today. In the 60s, all of the vaccines we did in Nigeria was made right here in Yaba. Today, not 1 pint is being produced in Nigeria. So, if
that's scary,
this lockdown continues, our children who are born, who have been getting born in the last couple of weeks, will not get their basic smallpox, measles, and COVID vaccines. And we may even have an outbreak going back to those old epidemics that have now technically been eliminated through vaccines. Now that's the kind of crisis Nigeria is in. So what do you expect to happen to the exchange rate in this kind of situation? We've tried very hard to pop up the exchange rate, play games with it, by the way, give access for more to those who are more favored and all of that, which is part of what led to the declining confidence in the Nigerian economy internationally. But we're so desperate, we've gone back to the IMF that we used to abuse. I mean, there's no problem with the IMF. I've never had any problem with going to the IMF because we are members of the IMF. We contribute. We have our SDRs, our special drawing rights. But the reason the IMF was set up was to ensure that people do not transport viruses from their economy to other economies by the way that they manage the economy when it flows into international trade. So the first task for you is give you conditionalities, conditions that you will fulfill to get this adjustment facility. But when they hit you with those conditionalities, your environment changes. These countries defy about these matters. I remember it was a debate in which everybody took, sadly, this pandemic apparently has claimed Professor Ibrahim Ayagi in Kano, but I remember the debates that I was on television with Ayagi in 1985 over this same IMF, non-IMF stuff. It is sad that we have talked for 30 years in every budget about diversifying the base of our economy from monocultural dependence on crude oil. Sounds like a recorded speech, and yet we've done very little about it. So that's where we are. We're in trouble.
Well, Prof, thank you very, very much. You said it was a 6-hour answer anyway, but I think you tried to make it in less than 6 minutes. I see Belema Epeya stand up. Do you want to take your question now? Belema Epeya Kiri. Are you there? Your hand has been on for a while. Okay, can we have Yinka Africa, depending when she's back?
I'm on a webinar.
Mr. Yinka Shokoya.
I'm on a webinar.
Mr. Yinka Shokoya. is okay. Maybe he's having it.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Charles.
Okay, please.
Hello, Mr. Charles. Can you hear me now?
On a seminar webinar on the other phone. Yeah, I can hear him. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Professor. In fact, we have really opened our minds, and our thinking faculty has been expanded by your explanation this morning. I think I want to digress a little, and I want to ask this question. Now, most of our young lawyers, I think a large bunch of the young lawyers, they live on the crumbs from their principal, and even the principals as it is, they are trying to also assume in this in the economic ocean caused by the pandemic. Now, we as lawyers, we are not allowed to really diversify into any other trade except farming by the rules. Now, what do we do? How do we really? I want you to please. What would be your advice to the young lawyers out there, sir?
Well, okay. When they say you're not allowed to diversify, it doesn't mean you can invest. One of the roles that I have played, largely as a missionary, because in the most I didn't get paid for it. Some I got material benefits, but it's the role of a business angel. I actually wrote a book. What year was this now? Many years ago, titled "Business Angel as a Missionary."
Mm.
That book was written because a friend of mine, Ben Murray Bruce, who you all know, Silverbird, came to visit me. I had just moved into this house then about 12 years ago or so. And he said, "Thank God you have done one thing for yourself." And I said, "What do you mean by that?" He said, "I've always wondered why you hate money." I said, "Me hate money? I'm the ultimate evangelist of free enterprise. Why would I hate money?" He says, "No, you live so modestly, and I can point to people who have become your back. I don't hate money. I actually believe that we expand the pool by trying to build many other people. And if 20 people were able to do very well because of either input from me or advice from me or suggestions from me, I would soon be responsible for 30, 40,000 being employed. And if I try to build one big business and the like, and that anyway, if you affect many people for good, many more people will remember you. So you're not likely to fall to the ground completely. That conversation, I wrote a book, Business Angel Companies, that started in my living room or my classroom or my office. They include the company that put Nigeria on the internet, LinkServe, includes Business Day, includes, of course, Platinum Bank, and so on and so forth. I gave a series of those in the book. And one of the things that I find in playing Business Angel is that I don't think lawyers do enough of that. You know, Nigerian entrepreneurs often make lots of mistakes fall because they don't try to engage professionals who they need. Part of the reason is that they have a general poverty mentality. They may not have cash, but they don't think in that way. I can give you a typical example. An American starting business is planning how much money they are going to pay for marketing costs. Marketing consultants might be, 60% of their, projection in their business plan. The Nigerian starting a business thinks, okay, when I make money, I'll then start doing marketing, advertising, and stuff like that. The same thing with the use of lawyers. I mean, I have a very strange situation where I won't mention who now, not to put ourselves in trouble. The child was in school Ivy League school in the US. Father was slaving, literally, to pay the school fees from Nigeria. Guy, street lawyer, rich millionaire guy. But his father has given him a loan to come to university, which he has to pay back. And his father brought another lawyer to draft the agreement and sign. Now, okay, that's how mindsets differ. But the point is that many of these startup businessmen, if they were young lawyers playing business angel, and you work with so many of them and help them to become more successful, not charging them in those early days or taking part equity in their business for playing that role of the lawyer, many more businesses will get it right. And the lawyers who have deferred their gratification now will get plenty of it when those businesses begin to bloom and blossom. So I think that one of the things I would really suggest to young lawyers, and there will be immense opportunity, there must be, if there is not, then we are all finished, for new businesses to start in the areas of agriculture and those things that will now help Nigeria finally diversify away from this dependence on crude oil. And young lawyers in the middle of many of those businesses as business angels can prepare the opportunity for lots of serious income going forward.
Piling up, Prof, and I'm trying to ensure that we keep around the time.
Yeah, I need to get out in the next 5 minutes or so.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll make the next questions very fast, and then Prof 2 will make the answers brief so that we can be out of here in another.
Maybe you can take the questions 2, 3 together.
Okay,
so
okay. So let me have Mr. Seyola Wumi very quickly. Immediately after Mr. Seyola Wumi, we'll have I have Seth Amefule. Then after Seth Amefule, we'll have Charles Omo Odidi. So those 3 questions very quickly. Seyola Wumi, Seth Amefule, and Omo Odidi. Very quickly, please. Mr. Olawumi.
Hello, Charles.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can hear you.
Hello, Charles.
Go ahead. We can hear you. I can hear you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
And Prof, thank you very much, Prof. It's so good to see your face. This time, Prof, delighted when you said that our economy, there's no doubt we are in a very, very good shape now. If I'm permitted to use that word, sir. For somebody that understands this economy, like yourself, I'm happy that you have come to explain, that we're facing this triple shock. I got that very well, sir. And also that all these factors will aggravate the economic impact of COVID-19, sir, and make it more difficult for the government to weather the storm, sir. Prof, sir, I just want you, before you leave this meeting room, sir, to help suggest ways, sir, because some of us are taking down notes here. So to help suggest ways that you think that this government, these steps, the 1, 2, 3 steps that this government can take, to help to stabilize, if not to stabilize the economy, at least to help the very ordinary man on the streets, sir. Because this thing is going to get worse, especially that now that we have increase in the number of people contracting this day by day. So, Prof, sir, before you leave, I want you to do that, sir. Thank you very much.
Can we have your question very quickly?
Yes, I don't intend to adumbrate or preface with anything. Prof,
yes.
Let me start protocols observed, sir. Now you have proposed that lawyers can venture into new areas. My challenge is venture capital. How can lawyers who do not have the capital to venture into areas or create opportunities, how can they access capital and be able to either access opportunities or even create opportunities.
Mr. Omodudu, Mr. Omodudu, please very quickly. Can we have you, Mr. Omodudu? I want to take one more question before I take answers from Prof. Just one more question. I see another hand here. I don't know, the hand is disappearing again.
Okay, Charles, maybe I should start answering these two while you are waiting for
Okay,
another.
let's take favor Okori. Prof, let's take favor with favor Okori. Favor Okori. Unmute your mic. Yes, please go ahead.
Can you hear me, sir?
Okay.
Good morning. Good morning.
So can I go ahead?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, Dr. Charles.
I see Charles
Hello,
Omo.
good morning, Dr. Charles.
Can you just hold on? Let's have Charles
for this.
They will now have favor Okori.
Okay, so I should hold on then.
Charles Omo Odudu, please go on.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Prof, good afternoon, and thank you very much for the presentation.
Yes, sir.
I'm a young lawyer, and my firm is largely into the traditional practice of law. By that, I mean litigation courtroom practice. And this pandemic and the lockdown, of course, no one saw it coming, and it has greatly affected our kind of practice. And we have been trying to see how we can diversify or go into areas or key into the available means we can forge ahead, but that has been difficult. I've been attending different webinars to see ways forward. I've been hearing different things, but practicalizing these things is looking very complex for us. And we don't know if this continues. We don't know how we'll progress or how we'll move forward. Because our clients are also not technology people, and the courtrooms, which is usually our regular houses, are not. They are trying to see how we can go online, but that has not been so feasible. So
it's very slow anyway. Let's have the question from Mr. Okori. Then Prof will
the fear is there. So we
Hello, Charles. You may need to mark.
Hello.
Yes, Mr. Okori.
Okay, good morning, Dr. Prof. Good morning, sir. Like my other speaker said, I'm a young lawyer. I heard Prof say something about Nigeria has a very advanced law practice. And he is suggesting that we find a way to go across beyond Nigeria in practice of law. But then the question now is, as a young lawyer, how do we wriggle out of the mess since we have not yet we are not abreast with the practice of law in Nigeria? Someone like me, I have a friend in Cameroon who is inviting me over to Cameroon for us to do practice. But then I need to know the principles of law in Nigeria before going over there. So my question is, in the face of these COVID-19 challenges and the courtroom are not in progress, how do we go about the process of the law so as to go beyond? Thanks so much, sir.
All right, Prof, the floor is yours.
Okay, maybe I should start with the last one very quickly. One of the beauties of this unfortunate pandemic is that you have more time on your hands, and this is time for research. And most of what you need is doing your homework. Thank God for Facebook and all the social media things. After you've done your research, you can identify possible partners in these other places. You can read up more on their legal systems, and when you find local people that you can work with, and you begin to engage them on whatever the social media are to build confidence, you can trust that they know their system a little better. You know this, but more importantly, there are basic rules of the game for international business. You just grow yourself in knowledge and work to apply those. You can work partnerships that can bring in others with strength in different areas and be able to build bigger law firms. Not that everybody is trying to be a one-man champion. And that's how you can grow. but your space is bigger now. It's all over Africa. You have an advantage that we have a more developed legal system in Nigeria. You have exposed to practice that's much better. And you can therefore use that, just like the way the big international law firms were beginning to muscle into Nigeria through their multinational clients that were wanted to take them everywhere. You can use the basis of opening up trade in Africa to advance your own track that way. The next question I was going to, from the one just before, I think, about lawyers practicing and needing capital. Actually, the fact of the need of capital, it's in itself a business opportunity. When I was talking about Rajan and Singale's book, Saving Capitalism from the Capitalists, and they talk about all these funds in America, what is the nature of these funds that young people access and use to build big businesses? A typical fund in the US would be called a search fund. What is a search fund? It is a fund that a young man, just because of the quality of his education, say he has an MBA from Wharton, from Kellogg, from Harvard Business School, I can go to and say, look, I'm not sure I have these general areas of interest, but I'm trying to find a kind of business that I can, applying these ideas I have, transform. And the fund is a business set up by a group of finance people who have a list of 500 lawyers and doctors who usually are high-income people. And what they do is they call a pool of maybe 30 or 40 of those and say, look, there's a bright guy called Okori from Kellogg who has these interesting ideas about, the way to restructure business. And he wants to search for a business to restructure. Can each of you put up $3,000 to give this guy to use to go and look for a business? He hasn't a business yet to go and look for. And then he goes out with that money, uses it well, finds an interesting business, does a new business plan that will change the trajectory of that business. By the way, my battery is threatening to run out, so if I disappear.
Okay.
Let me call somebody to get me a charger while I'm at this. Power pack. So the business, then he comes out with a business plan, and he call back all these doctors and lawyers, $20,000 each. This is the business plan. Look at it. If you feel like it, put down $20,000. And 50 of the 200 or 300 on their list, put down $50,000. This guy gets a certain amount of money to use to go and start that business. One particular example that I know of, the story was told to me at Wharton by no, just want to give me a power pack. Power pack. Sorry about that. Somebody, the guy looks for a business. He doesn't know what he's looking for. Finds an old couple running a candle business. They make candles. They're old. He said, oh, what are you doing? I thought the illumination problems were solved 100 years ago. I mean, since light bulb was invented, who uses candle? He says, well, somebody coming. The world we live in doesn't need your candles except maybe a few churches, or maybe when the hurricane blows past and people need to stay up for a day before power comes back. He should not be in the illumination business. Then he goes back and writes a business plan on how he can buy that factory for X million dollars. The couple are very happy to sell it. They just want some money to go retire to Florida and enjoy the rest of their life. But that he would not be in the illumination business anymore. He will be in the mood business. So he makes the same candle that I'm making, makes it smell nicer, makes it look more elegant, and calls it Valentine Mood Pack. Valentine's Day Mood Pack. Now, he knows that women, when they go to the shop before Valentine's Day, are not rational in their thinking. They're only thinking of the evening with their husband. They're not thinking of the cost of that candle. So that 20-cent candle is now sold $9.99. Just smells nicer, looks. And you know what? These doctors and lawyers put out $20,000 each, and he takes that candle business in 3 years to a $1.something billion business. Each of those lawyers and doctors that put up $20,000 become billionaires. So my point to you is that you can be the ones that create those funds. Get a list of high net worth individuals, look for bright young people who want to start businesses, and essentially marry these as funds, manage the regulators, and all of that. Okay. The earliest question was, or the first one was, what do we do about this economy? What should we be doing? Well, I think the first thing that we need to bear in mind is that we must now diversify away from oil. What is the strategy for doing that? I think that it's important that we look at our endowments. Thank you. What we have strengths in as an economy, what God has gifted us as a country, that we could actually be competitive on. And these days, that is called your latent comparative advantage. Not traditional comparative advantage, the latent comparative advantage. Because you then build global value chains with industrial policy to support your dominating setting global value chains. I, for example, believe that in agriculture, there are a number of endowments we have in which we can create the environment that will bring a lot of smart young people, and they will enjoy it and make a lot of money building those global value chains. We aggregate. One of the things we don't do well in Nigeria is we don't aggregate. So we're all small players. How do you aggregate in agriculture? You create a wholesale. I'm doing in Edo State. I'm starting with the plantain and cassava value chains. What it is that literally anybody who grows cassava or grows plantain will head to this wholesale produce market every day. We now guarantee them prices. We have preservation park. So the farmers are very happy because they're earning more for their plantain. We bring young, bright people as new agri extension service people. They go out and meet with these farmers, give them new ideas, give them sources of financing, give them this. And every day, everybody brings their plantain into this, our wholesale produce market. Those who use plantain, either those who bring them to Lagos to sell as middle people, or those who will process it, we are actually building right next to the market a plantain processing factory. So that what we buy from there goes into our factory, it's processed into flour, it's processed into different snacks from plantain, chips, and all of that. We plan to do exactly the same thing for cassava, to go from the lowest end of cassava chips to starch and ethanol. All of these will create a new export sector from agricultural produce. And these are the areas of opportunity, but it won't just happen. You need serious-minded people. Part of our real problem is that this economy has been damaged by the culture of economic rent. People don't want to work. They just want to transfer a piece of paper to another person and buy a fancy car.
Pleasure without
We've
work.
got to change that completely. We've got to process, we've got to add value, and we've got to earn. That is the most sustainable way to earn. It's part of the damage that oil did to this economy. And the challenge of this moment is how to unravel the oil mindset. Okay, Charles.
Prof,
I don't know what I missed
so
along
very
the way.
much. I will have to close the session now. I made a promise to Prof. The last webinar he attended, he spent about 4 hours answering questions. And I promised him, I said, this will be for 1 hour and it will be bustable speed to 90 minutes. We are on the dot of about 90 minutes now, and I need to keep to my promise. I put some information in our chat room, and I want everyone to take time to go through it. you need to watch this video again because there were a lot of things that Prof said so simply that as he was saying them, I was putting them into Google and my mind was blowing. Like, is this what this man just said in passing like that? So you need to watch this video again in your own private time, listen to all those things, and then check out your notes to build a comprehensive knowledge of what he has said. It's been really, really, really deep. Prof, I want to thank you so much. Like I said in the beginning, I do not know where you have this kind of generous mind from, but I know that we have learned it and we are going to replicate this kind of your awesome spirit. Thank you for all the good you do for us. Thank you for all the good you do for Nigeria and for representing Nigeria in a global space in no ordinary way. I thank you very much for honoring us, Prof. And I'll speak to you later, but let me allow you go while I close the class. Do you have anything to say finally to all the lawyers in the house?
It's a pleasure. I enjoy
Thank you so much, Prof.
The best to you all.
Thank you so much, Prof.
Thank
All
you.
the best.
So much, Prof.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Very much, Prof. We appreciate your contributions, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sir.
And for as many of us that are going to want to continue
Thank you, sir.
like this,
Really great.
Thank you, Prof.
we want to check out those links, and we need this conversation to be going on, and so that we can always be checking up on each other and taking action.
Thank you, Prof.
On Tuesday next week at 4 p.m., we're going to have another interactive session like this with one of the king of tech in the legal space and discuss that thing that Prof said about artificial intelligence taking the job of lawyers. We are going to ask ourselves, what exactly?
Thank you so much, Prof. Thank you, Prof.
And what are we supposed to be doing as lawyers? People are saying tech, tech, tech. What is tech? How do you apply tech? How do you diversify? Into what space? How do you go about it? We're going to be discussing that on Tuesday at 4 p.m. I want you to just stay tuned. And then if you are able to join the Law as a Business link, the conversation always starts from there before we come back. Thank you very much. I've been so honored to have you here, and I hope you watch your time. And that's bye-bye from all of us at the Penthouse Law. And for me, Charles Ajiboye, treasure you, and I hope to see you next time. I'm going to end the meeting now. Bye-bye.